I was 8 years old the autumn I started waiting at the bus stop, and I was 8 years old 3 years later when they finally came. People ask me sometimes how a child can do that, walk down a gravel lane every single afternoon, sit inside a weathered wooden shelter that smelled of pine resin and old rain, and wait for someone who is never going to arrive. I don't have a good answer for them. Children are faithful in ways that adults have mostly forgotten how to be. I didn't wait because I was stubborn or confused, though I was both of those things. I waited because it was the only thing I could do that felt like love. My grandmother raised me from the time I was 5. Before that I have impressions more than memories, the smell of engine oil and leather, a chest broad enough that I could sleep flat across it, a laugh that started somewhere low and took a while to reach the surface. My father was a big man who moved gently. That is the sum of what I carried into those years with my grandmother, along with a photograph she kept in the top drawer of her dresser and eventually, when I asked her enough times, gave to me. The photograph was creased across one corner and the color had gone a little warm with age. My father stood beside his motorcycle in a gravel lot, squinting into afternoon sun. He wore a leather vest over a dark shirt, and across the back of the vest was a patch, a circle of iron-colored thread on black leather, with a compass rose in the center and words along the top and bottom that I was too young to read with any confidence. He was smiling the way people smile when they don't know a camera is pointed at them. Easy and private. Like he was thinking about something good. My grandmother told me he died in a highway accident when I was 5. She told me this plainly, the way she told me most hard things, because she believed the plain truth was kinder in the long run than the softened version. I understood the words. I understood that he was gone. But a neighbor boy named Caleb had told me once, with the authority that 8-year-olds invest in each other, that his uncle had gone away on a long trip and came home on the county bus, and that bus riders always come home eventually if you wait long enough. I knew even then that Caleb was probably wrong. But knowing a thing and believing a different thing can occupy the same chest for a long time without either one winning. So I waited. The bus stop was a quarter-mile down the county road from my grandmother's lane, a wooden shelter with a rusted tin roof, 2 plank benches, and a gap in the front where the wind came through in winter. The afternoon bus from the next county ran at 4:15 on school days and didn't stop unless you flagged it. I never flagged it. I just sat inside with the photograph in my lap and watched the road in both directions, and when the light went thin and cold and my grandmother's voice carried down from the house, I got up and walked home. This went on for 3 years. I was 8, then 9, then 10. My grandmother watched me from the kitchen window, I found out later. She didn't try to stop me. She said afterward that she understood I needed somewhere to put the missing, and that a bus stop at least kept me in sight of the road. She is not a woman given to explaining herself, but she told me this once, that watching a child grieve is the hardest kind of watching, and that sometimes the only mercy you can offer is to let the grief go where it needs to go. It was a Tuesday in late October, I remember because we'd had a geography test that morning, when the motorcycle slowed down on the county road and stopped in front of the shelter. He was a big man, older, with gray in his beard and a leather vest that had seen 1,000 miles of weather. The chrome on his bike caught what was left of the afternoon light and threw it across the inside of the shelter. He cut the engine and sat for a moment looking at me through the gap in the shelter wall. I looked back at him. I wasn't afraid. I had seen men like him before, or thought I had, in some unnameable part of my memory that still lived back when I was 5. There was something about the weight of him, the way he held himself on the seat, that was familiar in a way I couldn't place. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was waiting. He asked what I was waiting for. I thought about it, the way you think about something when you've been carrying it so long you've stopped putting it into words. Then I took the photograph out of my coat pocket and held it up so he could see it from where he sat on the bike. He was quiet for a moment. Then he climbed off the motorcycle and walked to the shelter and crouched down so his eyes were level with mine, the way you do when you want a child to understand that you are speaking to them and not above them. He looked at the photograph for a long time. His jaw moved once, like he was working at something. "Is my daddy coming home?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. He reached out and touched the edge of the photograph, very gently, with one calloused finger, like he was touching something that might not survive being touched too hard. Then he looked at me with eyes that had gone dark and careful and asked me what my grandmother's name was, and what road we lived on. I told him. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd already half known. He stayed at the shelter until my grandmother called me in. He didn't say much else. He asked me my name and told me his, and before I walked up the lane he told me that my daddy had been a good man. The way he said it, not kindly, exactly, but with a weight that told me he meant it the way you mean something you've earned the right to say, I held on to that sentence for years afterward. I didn't know what he did when he left. I didn't know about the phone call he made from the county road, pulled off in the gravel with the engine running. I didn't know about the chapter meeting 3 days later, or the one after that in 2 other counties, or the way the news moved through the Brotherhood like a stone dropped in still water, ripple after ripple, until it reached men who had ridden with my father and men who had only heard his name and men who had never known him at all but understood what it meant that a road captain had left a little girl behind on a county road and no one in the club had known she existed. I found out later that my father had kept us separate from the club not out of shame but out of protection, a quiet, methodical kind of love that kept his 2 worlds from touching so that neither one could threaten the other. He had died before he could bring those worlds together. And so for 3 years, a little girl sat at a bus stop on a Tennessee county road while 67 men who would have moved the earth for her father had no idea she was there. The morning of November 7th I woke to a sound I had never heard before, a low, rolling thunder that didn't come from the sky. My grandmother was already up and standing at the kitchen window with both hands flat on the counter, not saying anything. I came and stood beside her and looked out at the gravel lane and the county road beyond it. They were already coming around the far bend. Motorcycles. Dozens of them, then more, the sound building on itself until it was less a sound than a pressure in the chest. They were riding 2 abreast down the center of the county road, leather and chrome in the pale November morning light, their breath and the Engine's breath rising white in the cold air. Some of them I would come to know well in the years that followed. That morning they were strangers, big, bearded, leather-vested strangers filling up the road from one shoulder to the other as far as I could see in either direction. My grandmother put her hand on my shoulder and said, quietly, "Go put your coat on." I went out through the kitchen door and down the gravel lane with my coat button crooked and my breath coming fast. The man from the bus stop was there, the one with the gray in his beard, standing near the shelter with his hands at his sides. Beside him stood another man, older still, with a broad face and a stillness about him that made the air around him feel different. He wore a vest with more patches than any of the others, and when he saw me coming down the lane he walked out to meet me and stopped, and then, without any ceremony or hesitation, he went down on one knee in the frost-hardened gravel so that we were the same height. He told me his name and told me that he had been my father's president, not the word I would have used then, but I understood he meant that they had ridden together and that my father had answered to him and he had answered for my father. He told me that my father had been the finest road captain in the chapter's history. He said this without any embellishment, which is the only way that kind of thing should be said. Then he reached into the breast of his vest and brought out something folded in a square of dark cloth. He unfolded it carefully. It was a patch, a compass rose on black leather, iron-colored thread, the same words along the top and bottom as in the photograph. It had been my father's. He held it for a moment and looked at me, and his eyes were steady but not dry. "Your daddy can't come home," he said. "But we can. And we're here." He reached out and pinned the patch to the front of my coat, over my heart, with a pin he'd brought for exactly that purpose. The metal was cold for a moment and then it was warm. Behind him the engines idled low, 67 of them breathing together on that county road, and I stood at the bus stop where I had waited for 3 years and understood, finally, that the waiting was over. Not because the thing I'd waited for had arrived. Because something had arrived instead that made the waiting unnecessary, something larger and more permanent than a bus and a man stepping down from it, something that filled the road from shoulder to shoulder and didn't leave, not that day, and not in any of the years that came after. My grandmother stood at the end of the lane and watched. I found out later that she cried, but she did it quietly and I didn't see. The man with the gray in his beard, the one who had stopped at the shelter that October afternoon, walked me back up the lane himself when it was time, with his hand resting easy on my shoulder. He told me he rode this road twice a month and would be watching for me. He kept that promise for 11 years, until his knees finally made riding impractical, and after that his son kept it for him. Every November 7th since then, on the anniversary of my father's death, 67 riders, or close to it, the number shifts with the years, some gone and some new, come down that county road in the gray morning light and stop in front of the old bus stop shelter. The tin roof has been replaced. The benches are newer. But the shelter is still there, and the road is still a 2-lane county highway that runs between nowhere in particular and nowhere else, and the sound of them coming around the far bend still does something to my chest that I haven't got words for, even now. I don't wait at the bus stop anymore. But every November 7th I walk down the gravel lane in my coat, and I stand at the shelter, and I watch them come. My father was a road captain. He kept his two worlds separate out of love, and he died before he could bring them together. But the Brotherhood found the seam between those worlds eventually, the way they always do, one gray-bearded man stopping his bike on a county road because there was a little girl in a bus stop holding a photograph, and they pulled it open, and they walked through, and they have never gone back to the other side. That is what 67 men on motorcycles can do on a cold November morning on a Tennessee county road. They can reach back across 3 years of waiting and a little girl's stubborn, faithful love and tell her, without saying very much at all, that she was never as alone as she thought she was. And she wasn't.